Welcome to the Level Design Podcast. In this episode, we will take control and have a tour of the oldest house. I'm the director, Mark Drew, and my executive officer is Jonathan Wilson. Joining us is a very special guide and janitor, Paul Ehreth, the lead designer of Control by Remedy Entertainment. Perkele! Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Thanks, Mark. It's really nice to be here.
And thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, great to be back.
We had to do this podcast because we absolutely love the game. And this is going to be a spoiler cast. So feel free to talk about, bits of the ending of the game, because I think we'll talk about it later. We'll tell you of the spoilers coming up, so you can pause the podcast, go and play it on PlayStation, on PC, and then come back and play the rest of it. So Control is a game for PC, PlayStation, Xbox 360. Do you want to give us a little bit of background about the game? I mean, what is it? How would you describe it?
So that's a really good question. I guess on the surface, Control's a third-person action-adventure game. There's a lot of shooting and a lot of action, a lot of abilities, supernatural abilities, where you get to pick up things and launch them against enemies, a lot of different abilities you have as the player. And you are exploring this rather strange and shifting building in New York called the Oldest House. And it's the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, which is a secretive government organization which kind of tries to investigate these otherworldly events and tries to understand and keep them under control. And you play as Jessie Faden, who is a woman with a very dark and mysterious past. And she has been led to the Oldest House to try to find her brother, Dylan. And when she sort of discovers the Oldest House and steps foot inside, she becomes the new director of the Bureau. And at the same time, this sort of otherworldly force known as the Hiss begins taking over. And you have to, fight the Hiss and get everything back under control.
That's the best summation I've ever had for a game. I mean, it is.
It's nice to have that summary after finishing it. It just summarizes everything. It's like, yeah, that's good.
Because I think, that's a great summary. And we're saying that it's great because I think if you asked me to summarize it, that would be the rest of this podcast.
Yeah.
I think that there's so many influences in this game that are fantastic. But you've been involved in a lot of games, and one that I noticed was The Agency.
Yes.
There was the Bureau and the Agency, right? The one's the XCOM kind of FBI one, or am I thinking of The Agency?
The Agency was a game that got canceled. That was by Sony Online Entertainment. It was a third-person shooter MMO where you were in a spy agency, like in the 1960s, kind of James Bond.
Right. But you've also worked on other stuff, including some fairly well-known games such as Halo 4 and 5 and Shadowrun. And then, is this your first game with Remedy, or?
This is my very first game with Remedy. I actually came to Remedy to design this game and help the team build it.
That must be a hell of a pitch.
Yeah.
It was, but they did a really good job because Miksu, aka Mikhail Kasurinen, who is the creative director of the game, he had worked together with the team to basically make a mod of Quantum Break that would showcase this sort of game that he had envisioned. And it was, of course, a very rough prototype, but he showed me a video of it when I was interviewing. And right when I saw the video, I was completely sold. And I said, this is the kind of game that I've been wanting to make for a really, really long time. And so all the pieces just kind of fell together.
So they kind of pitched the project to you then when you kind of interviewed. They sold you on it from the get-go. That's a pretty cool entry point.
Yeah. So when I started, the project didn't even have funding. So I kind of made a bit of a leap of faith and sold half of my belongings and put the other half in storage, and then moved to a foreign country and signed up for this crazy project, which didn't even have funding yet, and we weren't sure if it was going to get it. But after I saw that first tech demo that they put together, it was everything that I kind of wanted to make in a game, and I think Mixu and I shared the vision very closely.
I can definitely see why if they had this idea at the start of you joining them and they showed that to you, I can see the attraction. Just from obviously I know it would have been very rough back then, but like if the theme was there and the idea, I can definitely see the appeal and kind of the draw of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really pay off. How do you feel about the reception of the game now? It's been released. It's been released a week, is it?
Yeah.
Recording.
Yeah, maybe a couple of weeks now. It's been amazing. I think this is the highest meta scored game that Remedy has made in 17 years, something like that. I think.
Wow.
I think it was Max Payne 2 was the last was the highest rated game, maybe. But yeah, it's been amazing, and it's like this huge wave of relief because we were trying to take some risks, some calculated risks, but we did some risky things, which I can tell you more about. But we didn't know if anybody was going to like it or appreciate it, and you never really know. I mean, I've worked on enough games now to know that you can appreciate something very deeply, but whether or not somebody else will is a completely different question. And for every person that says, "Oh, this is my favorite game," there's somebody else that thinks it's the worst game they've ever played. And so you kind of plan everything, you put it together, and then you roll the dice, and there it goes.
It's kind of strange because a lot of the themes not the themes in the game, I think I want to say the feel, but not the look of the game, reminds me a lot of some mid-90s stuff. If I can see myself having just watched Twin Peaks and then switching on my futuristic console and playing Control, do you know what I mean? It just feels of that era, even not technically, but just thematically. And that was really all driven by Jan, our art director. He's been with the company for quite a while, and they had some really good references. If you want to know like why everything in the game kind of has this very unified feel and look to it, it really comes back to Jan, and he was so good at driving that overall look and feel of the game. The logo, kind of everything that is tied into the mood and feel of this world came from Jan and Stuart, as well, our other kind of world director. And so these two guys kind of work together to drive this in that direction. And so you'll see some references from Twin Peaks, from other movies, like maybe a little bit of Annihilation in there. Yeah.
As well.
It definitely pays off, because obviously as you're going around the oldest house, like despite there are obviously multiple levels to this facility, but like you do always get that like kind of, you start to build a sense of familiarity as you're kind of going around, or at least that's what I found while I was playing, and that kind of like that beckons me to thinking of like kind of old games like Resident Evil 2. Obviously the police station was an environment you became very familiar with, and like as I play Control, I find each floor and the oldest house overall is giving me the same sense of familiarity I have with the Resi 2 police station from a level design point of view.
And that's kind of what we were going for. The level design, I can talk, obviously it's what we're here kind of to talk about, so I can talk a whole lot more about that. Actually, one last thing I forgot to mention as a reference that might be a bit surprising to some people is one of the key references for this game's kind of feel was a film called Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And
oh really?
Yeah.
Wow. That was the old one, or the one that came out?
The one with Gary Oldman. I think that's the newer one.
Yeah,
the newer one. Yeah.
Yeah. You may, if you watch that movie again, you may notice some key similarities, particularly the scene where they're all kind of sitting around the table in the silent room that's blocked off from the outside. That was kind of one of the key images that inspired the mood of the game.
I think I'll have to go back and watch it now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good film. It's not like, oh no.
That's really great.
I think I even saw it in the cinema for spy thriller. That's like, a talky one. It was a very good one. So the first minutes, I have to make an admission. I was a big fan of the game just because of the look. I think Remedy released a whole bunch of wallpapers a while back. And I was just, these have been my wallpapers for the last however many months, and I've just been soaking them in. But then the video started coming out. I was going like, no, I don't want to watch them because I know what trailer makers do, and this is not the game makers or even filmmakers. What people make trailers, you tell me too much and you show me too much, and I don't want to see that. I want to experience it. So there was one bit which was very near release actually, which was I think the first 5-10 minutes of the game, like literally from Jesse standing outside the Bureau of Control.
Yeah, I think that was the story trailer.
That, again, double sold me down because it was like, wallpapers look great. They're like very specific angles. They're very specific things. But you go into this incredibly brutalist building, and right from the outset, things are weird. Like the first piece of paper that you pick up is like, no smartphones, no smartwatches, no smart anything, and no number 2 pencils.
Yep.
I like that nice touch because it builds as you read other things as well. It's quite a nice little nod at the very beginning of the game that you can track throughout.
Yeah, that's really a testament to the writing team that we have. They left no stone unturned, and any opportunity they could find to put flavor and soul into the world, they took it, and I was just blown away and so impressed by the whole writing team at how good of a job that they had done in putting those details in there.
And it's also a gorgeous game. I mean, we can go to the technicalities of it, but with RTX on, you can see Jesse from all sorts of angles because it's in an office building in parts with glass walls, right? You have like these glass office walls, and you see yourself walking towards them, which kind of blew my mind. I know this is a technical point, but it is incredibly like immersive is used too much, but when you actually see the character within the situation with the reflections working is actually kind of next level. But now you have to put photo mode, because I swear I have a folder full of images just that I've been snapping whilst I go along.
It's coming. Photo mode's coming, and it's going to be nice. I think. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but people have already started like hacking and modding the game, and somebody found a way to basically put in their own photo mode. And we were laughing. I think somebody sent a message in Slack that just said, "All right, pack it up. We're done. We don't need to make the photo mode. Somebody else has done it."
No, I saw that hack, and because I was going, how do you get all the photos without Jesse in it? I mean, as good as Jesse is, the environment really speaks to it, and this is why we had to have you on a level design show, because that's the next character in this game. It literally is
it's the environment itself.
Yeah. So one of the things that I personally really enjoy about games is where you just kind of come to a stop and you just look, and you just kind of feel this really rich sense of being. There's kind of no other way to say it, but you just feel like you are in this environment, and you can just sit there and feel that immersion. And some games do this really well. I mean, there's of course games like Breath of the Wild where you just kind of come to the cliff edge and you just look out and in total awe. But other games, even like the very first Half-Life game, I remember just kind of sitting in a corner, and the blinking lights and the texture of the concrete and the tone of the room, everything was so immersive. I just kind of sat there and just enjoyed that moment. And I really wanted this to be that same type of situation where players could find a place and just pause and enjoy that sense of being.
Well, you've hit it, but very strangely enough, using a type of architecture that doesn't lend itself to this, like, I'm going to sit here and look at this massively brutalist building.
Yeah, and that was actually a very conscious design choice early on to go with the brutalist architecture, because Remedy is this team was a small team, and it's very, very difficult, as a lot of studios are finding out, to survive as a AA studio. Most either have closed at this point, or they've been absorbed or bought out by a bigger studio, and it's really difficult. Most studios hit what I call the game funding paradox, where you can't get as much money as you need, so you have to overpromise, and then you're forced to under-deliver. You basically can't make the game. You see this all the time on the funding websites. I'm totally blanking on. It's not GoFundMe. It's the other one that everybody was
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter. Thank you. Yeah, and so people would ask for $500,000 to make a game, and to players that must seem like an ungodly amount of money that they're asking for.
Right.
But to developers, who have to pay people a living, a good wage, who have families and healthcare, and it's really expensive to fund a project, and $500,000 doesn't even scratch the surface on a game, and so a lot of people end up running into trouble.
I mean, salary, like you mentioned salaries are only a piece of that puzzle, right? There's the entire production value, then you get to the end, there's marketing, there's publishing, there's certification. Right. There's just the costs just mount up and up and up over and over again.
Absolutely. And so we're a relatively small team, but we're trying our hardest to sort of compete with the big studios, the big, really well-funded AAA studios, and I have experience both working in indie and working on some of the Halo games, or I would say some of the biggest budget games in the history of games recently, for better or for worse. and so we had to be really smart, and so we thought that how can we build a world that is has a beautiful look to it, but doesn't require a lot of fine detail to it. And the brutalist concrete was the answer to that. Of course, we ended up handcrafting it anyway.
It was a good idea, though. It was a good idea.
Yeah.
This is kind of strange. I was working on a game years ago called Depot, and one of the things that we had was a brutalist architecture in it, and it was for the same reason. It was like, well, I have no team. I can do a lot of gray and put a bit of a bump map, and I'm done. Yeah. I'm out of here, Yeah. But yeah, Control is not that. I think it's absolutely beautiful buildings, and the level design in it is kind of works with that architectural style. That's what it seems to me.
Sure.
I think the blocky nature of the environments definitely help you definitely helps the framing of things, the actual flow of the overall spaces, because they all feel grand and epic for the most part, kind of when you're going through them, and especially when you kind of reclaim a control point and you kind of see it all move back, and it almost feels like the entire layout's changed, despite you probably won't traverse that part of it before you've done it, but you get to see this evolving level, and it just gives you this more you feel like there's more there than what there actually is.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was kind of one of the pillars early on, was a shifting world. We had some really great concept art that we were kind of working off of. I actually wanted to take it a little bit further, but we just kind of ran out of time. But one of the things that we wanted to kind of show, and we do show it in a few places, where the building has shifted in a very unnatural way. And you kind of have to figure out how to get up there or go around this shiftedness. So that was part of one of the pillars of kind of building the world, was make it feel like this is a shifted and strange place that you're visiting.
And I think beckoning back to mentioning the kind of familiarity with the space you start to develop while you're playing through the game, one of the things that obviously helps with that is the fact obviously you don't start out of the box with all your abilities, so it's you'll eventually stumble across something you can't do, which is something that we see in games, but in this instance it's really powerful, because you'll remember where that instance was, where that door I couldn't do, or that gap I couldn't get across. Guess what, I can levitate now, I can reach that thing, and then you go back and it just opens up so much more. But it's a good way to encourage more exploration, especially within the spaces that you've sort of built.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder or worry if we may have gone too far with the optional content. One of the things that the criticisms of games recently is people will say, oh, I felt like the side missions were very kind of meaningless, or they felt like filler, just a bunch of fetch quests, and I kind of felt that, and I wanted to, how well we succeeded or didn't is kind of up for other people to judge, but the intent was that we would actually put really meaningful content that you can find at your own choice. Like the things that you find in the world are based on your chosen level of involvement with the world.
Yeah.
And also the quest givers, and I think in this game, having just been chasing a rubber duck round quite a lot today, are actually very spot on for the environment. I mean, I'm sure this happens in a lot of games, but it's really nailed it, and they're really interesting characters, like the guy that runs a panopticon.
Yeah. So Anna Marie Groenroos was one of our very talented mission designers. She was responsible for the research sector, and she was the one that came up with many of those ideas just from her own creativity. The duck, the mirror world, and the shifting maze.
Hashtag spoilers, I think, from now on, because
Sure.
I think we're now getting into the depths of the game. There's a lot of parts of this game that seem to be pulled from my psyche, because there's things that you encounter that do what I wanted them to do, and in a lot of games they don't. And you've managed to do those things, like the mirror, right? Should we talk about the mirror?
We can talk about the mirror.
So I think if you've made it this far, stop, go play the game, come back, because we're going to be talking about quests in the game that we don't want you to be spoiled. But okay, now that they've gone, we can carry on. So the mirror is an object of power that basically, if you touch it, you go on the other side of it, and the whole world is reversed. And I'm not sure if I was talking with Jonathan about this, but it does a shot in which was done in Interstellar, which is a girl running towards a mirror, and she gets to the mirror. You look at her running towards you, but suddenly she opens the mirror and she's on the other side of it.
Oh, Contact with Jodie Foster.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, good.
Fantastic shot.
Yeah, and that's what the mirror shot reminded me. Even though it's just a camera going through the lens, going through the glass of the mirror, right? That is and that's what I expected it to be. Weirdly enough, doesn't mean it didn't surprise, but it's.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things is that Remedy has a sort of pedigree of being weird.
Yeah,
and it's fun because we can kind of do whatever we want, and that was kind of the direction of the mission spaces, and the missions was make it weird, and then we would keep adding words like make it really weird, and it's not weird enough, like we were trying to find like, okay, well, what is too weird? We were trying to push the envelope so much to find out, what is getting to the point where people want to talk to their friends about it because they're like, did you see that thing?
Yeah.
Is that what we think it is, or is that something completely different? And to also leave questions sometimes not completely answered.
So I guess with that, like, as a pillar, I guess, like go weird or go super weird, was there like anything that ever went too far, or was it the case of why they were trying to make it weird, it just no longer made sense for the game? So it's not so much it like was too much, it was just it didn't really fit in line with the other missions or the other stuff that you were doing.
Really good question. So I have a whole philosophy on this, which is it's not enough to be weird. So I'm a big fan of Dark Souls and all of Miyazaki's games. There were other games and game developers that played the Dark Souls games, and they saw how profitable they were and how successful they were, and they would say, make us a Dark Souls game. And so they would go off and they would say, okay, well, what makes a Dark Souls game? Okay, well, it's got to be weird. You've got to have these weird characters and weird things in the world. and that's true, but if that's all you have, then players, I think, will really quickly lose interest in it because there's no deeper meaning to it. And so when you make something weird, to me, it's not enough just to make something weird, because all you have then is novelty. And what we, I think, are really after as humans is truth. And so what makes games like Dark Souls so compelling is that it all has deeper meaning. It is all connected. It is all, there for a reason. Everything in that world exists for a reason. And so you get all these ripple effects, these chain reactions, and it grows kind of like a tree. Miyazaki planted the seed, which is like, okay, in the beginning there was fire. Okay, and then out of the fire came these different lords. And then each of these lords made these decisions that, affected the world. And then you go and go and go, and pretty soon you grow this whole tree out of the world. And what other studios or other people, when they try to analyze these games, what they see is the leaves at the top of the tree,
right,
without understanding that the leaves are connected to the branches, and the branches are connected to the trunk and to the roots, and so on. And so when we made Control, we started out investigating these different things that we could do that were strange and weird and wonderful. But then what I was always pushing for is, okay, that's great, but now we have to connect it together. It has to have a deeper meaning. There has to be a reason for it to be here, that you can learn and discover. Otherwise, it's going to feel shallow, and just like a novelty, you'll lose interest pretty quickly.
No, that's a really good philosophy, and it makes sense. It's like, it's all well and good to have. It's like having any cool moment or weird moment in a game. It's all well and good, but if that's all you have, it doesn't have any context, it doesn't fit in with the game, then it loses its value almost immediately.
Absolutely.
One of the things obviously you brought up in that philosophy was obviously looking at Dark Souls, for instance. And one of the things I was kind of curious about, like as a designer from that point of view, is the difficulty curve of the game and kind of the scaling to that. Like, what was your, I guess, like the design mentality around it? Because at least while I was playing, I found on the main line I was fine if I was kind of going through that, and if I ventured off onto side quests and stuff, it seemed to be, I would feel underpowered, which would force me either back to the main line or I would have to go and do some side quest or something to level up. Was that a conscious decision to make the kind of punishment of getting defeated be what put you back? Or was that just something that kind of came out of it?
It was conscious, but it had an unforeseen consequence, which is kind of what you mentioned. So we started out with the intent of not having players selected difficulty similar to Dark Souls or Destiny. We wanted to kind of make this crafted experience. And there's pros and cons to it. I think there's really good arguments for why we should have had different difficulties, and I don't disagree with that, by the way. It was,
but there
really
is a sort of gating there in some of the things. I'm going to say the anchor, for example. You can't even get to the anchor and possibly even fight it off if you don't have
certain abilities
that you're comfortable using.
Yes. Yeah. So what happened was, when we set out to design the game, we would say, okay, well. We're in this weird place as Remedy, because Remedy is known now for more like story-driven games rather than the more difficult skill-based games, like I guess the earlier games like Max Payne, where I think you could say they were a bit more skill-based than the later games. So we were a little bit worried that we might alienate too much of the audience who loves Remedy games for the story. So what we ended up deciding to do is that we would put the main story as a not super steep difficulty curve, so that a majority of players would be able to get through it without too much trouble. And then where we would put the really big challenges would be in these sort of side missions for players to engage that wanted more of a skill challenge. But as you mentioned, one of the things that kind of ended up happening was a lot of players, path of least resistance, there is good risk reward on a lot of those side missions. So, you do get some good rewards for the amount of risk. but a lot of players ended up just kind of being pushed more back onto the main path. And then after beating the game would go back and play those side missions, which I think is a valid way of playing the game as well.
Because I think that's one of the things about this game which I found, now it's totally spoiler territory, that after you finish the game, you're still director of the oldest house. You still got a cleanup job to do.
Yeah.
Right? And it's enjoyable to hey, I just found out about it. I've just discovered it. And now I can actually kind of get on with my job, right? Yeah,
and that was another big thing that we really wanted to go for was when you have like a linear story-driven game and you finish it, there's not much else you can do with a game. You could start it over, play it again. But I think what we wanted to do was really give players more bang for the buck, make it a more replayable experience where you can get much more gameplay out of it even after you finish the main storyline. And I think that's really important. I didn't want us to do that unnaturally or make it feel forced in. I really wanted to build the combat around replayability and you feel like you're growing in strength, and at some point you feel like you can master it. And we have some new challenges, namely the expeditions that are going to come out soon, which is really going to ramp those challenges up in an interesting way.
I think, like you said, the balance between side content and main content, it kind of works. And I do like the fact that, yes, I finished the main story, but I still have stuff to explore. I still have something to go and do.
And those rubber ducks that you have to go and get. And so many clocks.
There's a couple of clocks in the game.
Yeah. And also so many bathrooms. I have to say this, from a level design point of view, everyone forgets to put the bathrooms in, but every level I think is even... on an architectural scale, it says okay, there's so many people here, they have to have X amount of bathrooms.
We have level artists that are very particular about the realisticness of the space. Yes.
As a level designer, I've had arguments about where a bathroom should be in a space. So if I see a space and it doesn't have one, I kind of question the functionality of said space.
Right, well, it takes you out, right? It's like having random corridors somewhere for no reason where you could, you could probably just walk around the side. There's actually one level, and I think it's a cafeteria, and they have the bathrooms behind a big block with plants in front of it. And I was like, this is exactly where you'd put the bathroom, right? You'd hide them behind this pretty thing. It's the level design in this game is astounding because it is also very impressive in its scale. There's I think the foundation level is where you're looking for the janitor. I think you could walk for days. I don't know if it's an infinite level, but it just feels it,
Yeah, that was something that was a bit of an uncomfortable push because the level designers and the environment artists at Remedy had never built anything to that scale before. And I was fairly familiar with building to that scale from the Halo games, which in my humble opinion, I think does scale quite well in the levels. And so I'll give you an anecdote, which is there was a story when I was studying 3D animation. There was a story about Walt Disney where he was telling an animator to exaggerate something he was animating. And the animator would draw it bigger and more exaggerated, and Walt Disney would come back and say, no, bigger, more exaggerated. And he would draw it bigger and more exaggerated. And eventually this went on until the artist was so frustrated that he said, all right, I'm going to make this so big that son of a bitch won't be able to say it's too ridiculous. I'm going to draw it way bigger than he would ever be okay with. And so he drew it so exaggerated that when Walt Disney saw it, he said, that's perfect. And that story always stuck to me. And so when it came time to building the level spaces, I would say, make it bigger. And they would make it a little tiny bit bigger. And they would nudge it out a bit. And I'd say, no, much bigger. Eventually it got to the point where the first real big scale test that we did was the power plant. And I said, I want you to make a nuclear power plant, and I want you to make it ridiculously big. And they made it so big that I said, all right, this is actually a little bit too big. So they did it. I mean, to their credit, they totally did it. They went so big that they actually went past where I was comfortable, and we actually had to pull it back a little bit. And it's still humongous. I mean, it's one of the biggest spaces in the game, I think.
I think that's the thing in like level design, like especially if you've got like in your game like movability and kind of traversal is a very big thing. So you can levitate, you can jump around. So like having these big spaces, obviously it makes them a lot more fun to jump around and play in. But I guess you have to be careful because like you said, if you do go to a point where you're uncomfortable with it, because you make a giant space, you've still got to fill it. And filling it without it feeling empty at the same time is always the biggest challenge. It's like, yes, this is going to look amazing in terms of the scale of it, but if it's not populated, then it loses a lot of that impact from being that size.
Absolutely. And that was, so early on, the whole, if you can imagine the power plant area, the whole floor was basically flat and complete, like a complete circle. Mm-hmm. And then we tried to break it up because it was way too much space for the player to run around in. And so we tried to break it up with like fences and heat vents, but it just kind of didn't look very good, and it didn't work very well, and it visually it was very confusing. And so eventually one of the artists took the heat vents and pushed them all down way under the floor. And that's what created those big kind of empty spaces, which you can fall to your death in. And I think it works much better in guiding the player.
Well, it's like you've got like a mixture of like positive and negative space there, right? So like you can see where you can go and where you can't go. So it instantly changes how the player perceives how to get through this space. And I guess they're not going to traverse every segment of it like they would have in the original.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the questions. I mean, some games are quite a bit more open, like the Far Cry series, and they handle that very well. The level design becomes more like point to point, and then you get to find your way there.
I'm forgetting the name of it. Is the pit as another environment that's just huge. It's got a beautiful night sky that there's even tents that you can go and sit down on and look at the environment, and that's huge. That's a huge level.
Yep, that was more Anna Marie, and that was again one of those places where it was pretty tight and closed up, and I kept saying, like let's push this out, make it bigger. Let's come to this vista here. Mm-hmm. To me, level design is all about pacing and flow, and really guiding the experience of the player. And a lot of that comes from just good filmmaking. Good cinematography, framing, I think, is really important as well. And so when you kind of come to the pacing and flow of a level space, I think it's really important to be working through both the smaller spaces and then having it open up to where the player can actually appreciate the larger spaces and give them a moment to appreciate those larger spaces. Because if everything is big, then you kind of lose that profundity. I think Frank Lloyd Wright was really good at this. He built a house in my neighborhood where I grew up, and I got a chance to tour it. And in this house, he built the hallways at just about 2 meters, maybe a tiny bit above 2 meters. So they were really pretty low. Like I was almost hitting my head on the ceiling. But then when you walk out of the hallway into the living room ceiling isn't that high. It's not that vaulted, but because of the scale difference, when you walk out of that really tight hallway, you feel like you've walked into a cathedral. And it was so incredible just to have that experience and see how he played with scale, that I never forgot that. And so I try to remember that whenever I'm building or designing levels, that to make the big spaces feel amazing, even if they're not that big, play with that scale beforehand so that it, you really get that sense.
Just adds more weight to the reveal, right? So it's like you said, it doesn't have to. You don't have to have gone from a corridor into an actual cathedral. You could go from a corridor into a room with a slightly elevated ceiling, but because you've been in a more claustrophobic space, it feels like a much more grander reveal.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting because it has so much impact, but like making something like bigger or smaller is quite a simple effect to do, and it's like it carries so much weight in level design just for how you can funnel people.
Yeah, it really does.
What's your personal favorite thing about this game? Am I asking too much?
No, that's good. It's just a really difficult question to answer. I want to say first that it's really important to acknowledge that this game was not made by me. It was made by one of the most talented teams on the planet, and it only came together because of the incredible talent and hard work of this team kind of all pulling together and working together to make the game the best we can make it. But when I was sort of establishing the design framework for this game, because I had, the authority to do that, I was taking every piece from every game that I loved, and I was trying to put it all together into one, like the one game that was everything that I would love to play. Personally, myself, I think Miyamoto had a quote that was kind of controversial, but he said, I never design games for other people. So I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of, I don't design games for other people. And I think that it's actually kind of important to start from there, where I am building something that I really want to play, and then with the hope that there is at least one other person out there that feels the same way that I do, right? And ideally, for business reasons, it would be more than one person.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that we, as designers and builders, as I'm sure you guys have felt as well, that you build something that you are incredibly passionate about building, and that you have a really strong vision for how this is going to be so cool. And that way, you are kind of staying true to this vision of something that you believe is going to be great. And then you share that with other people, and you hope that they like it as much as you do. And so when it came to designing Control, I took bits and pieces from all these different games that I loved. There's a little bit of economy from Monster Hunter. There's some level design from Dark Souls. There's some gameplay from Doom and Halo in there. And so it was almost difficult when people would ask me, like, how do you describe this game? Like, what is this game? It was really kind of hard in a sense to describe it, because there kind of wasn't any one game that it fits tightly into being a parallel to, for better or for worse, of course. But I guess when it comes to what I like the most about this game, I'll give you two things, because I don't think I can pick one. One is the sense of awe and mystery in the environment. I wanted to create spaces that you wanted to explore. You wanted to find out what is in the next room, like what is around this next corner, what is going to happen, and really feel naturally driven to do that, and not just because we're telling you, okay, go into the next space and then you're going to fight more enemies. So really make it a natural desire from the player to progress forward and want to know what's going to happen next. So that's one thing that I really like about this world. And even now, as I play the game, I'm excited to kind of find out what's in the next room, what's going to happen next. And the second thing I guess I would say I like the most is just the kind of fundamental combat loops that we put into the game. And that's something that I feel very strongly about, especially when it comes to evergreen gameplay. There's a lot of examples of this that made me kind of take notice, and I kind of don't want to name names. I want to, but I'm not going to name names of these games. But there are some games that I absolutely loved playing, and I played through it 100%. Did everything I could do in the game. But after I beat it, there kind of wasn't a reason to play it again. I kind of start playing it a second time and then kind of lose interest, because it was kind of the same thing. To me, it was almost like reading a book the second time. Everything's going to happen the same way.
Nothing's changed.
And then there were other games I would play, like Halo 1 was hugely impactful to me, where after I finished the campaign, I played it through a second time, and then like a third time. And I think I played it maybe 10 times through that campaign. And I wanted to know. I was surprised at how compelling this game was, and I wanted to understand better. Okay, why can I play a game like this shooter, which is very cool and I really like it, but I don't really have a desire to ever play it again? And why can I play through Halo as many times as I can, and it always feels fresh and new to me. And so that was what I was chasing after with the gameplay of Control. I wanted it to always feel like you could drop into the game, that the controls wouldn't be overly complex or difficult to remember again. They'd be fairly intuitive. And then just running around, blowing stuff up, picking things up, throwing it at enemies, and engaging in combat with them would stay fresh. And so whether or not we succeeded at that is, again, up to players to decide, but that was the intent.
I mean, I think that kind of shines through with how many physics objects are in that game, right? So that you can destroy nearly every part of the environment, and then on the off chance you can't find anything to pick up with your levitate power, Jesse just rips a chunk out of the wall or off the floor, so that you're never unarmed, right? That you're always able to get something and use that ability. There isn't any.
So that was something that actually changed from the first prototype. The original prototype, you could highlight an object that was on the other side of the room, and then you could press your launch button to have it levitate in place. So it would levitate where it was, and then when you let go, it would go towards the nearest enemy that you were targeting. And it felt good, and it was okay, but there was a sort of a design problem that started happening, especially as we started arting up the environments, which is there were so many things that the object would hit that about 80% of the time your launched object would fail. It would just not hit the enemy. It would go bouncing off something else, a generator, and go flying away. And so I had to make a difficult design decision at one point, maybe about pretty early on in the project. And I basically said, we're going to have to treat this like a sort of hybrid of the two. And so if you notice, what happens first when you try to lift an object up is it does very briefly lift up in place before coming towards you. And so if you let go of your launch button right when you start lifting the object, it'll actually fly from where it's at to hit the enemy. But that's sort of like a frantic, if you really know what you're doing or you're frantic, it'll go flying. But then if
it's kind of like those little knives, it's kind of like a little shuriken that you just.
I've taken advantage of that a few times. Just quickly launching it, and it is quite satisfying to see. It's I don't have to wait for it to come all the way back for me to take my shot. I can just I've run out of bullets, but that guy's coming at me. If I do a quick tap, I've launched a chair or something at him, and then it keeps the combat going. So it does. It can't say if you realize it, it's not really an exploit because it's still you could still miss or whatever, but it allows you to keep fighting. It doesn't stop you and make you have to run away, which is kind of a comment on the combat. Was there's a lot of ways as you get more abilities, the combat just starts to flow better, right? You're not really ever left without a way to attack.
Absolutely. And so the second problem that would happen was we had to start because it would only launch the object you were selecting. Eventually, we would either run out of objects, or it's really difficult to build a level where you prop it up with all these props that you need. That takes a lot of time when you're trying to iterate very quickly on a level. And so we had a debug command that would spawn an object in if there wasn't one already in the room, and that way we could make sure that we could always test the launch combat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I basically had to say, you know what? It really doesn't feel good when you have nothing to launch. So let's just make it so if you don't have an object in the environment, we'll spawn one in for you. And then it was the effects and artists that made the ripping the concrete out of the floor and the walls effect happen, and that really helped sell it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I still need to know who goes round after me because I keep on banging Jesse's head in all the concrete and there's rebar everywhere, and then I come back, it's all nice and pristine.
Ahti might have something to do with that.
Yeah. So talking about Ahti is kind of Ahti, sorry. It's kind of interesting that he is literally the boss. I mean, it's left right at the beginning saying you're coming to work for me.
Oh, he's just a janitor, It's
Yeah.
He's got a.
Right.
It's a big building, and there's a lot of work to do. So you needed an assistant.
We have to talk about two. I'm going to say levels. I mean, they're levels, but they are. One's a level which is the ashtray maze. That's just a beautiful. The contrast after quite a lot of the game, because this comes in at the latter half, isn't it? It's like nearly towards the end that you're doing the ashtray maze, which is this absolutely gorgeous red environment, lush environment, compared to all the kind of brutalism that's been happening for the last few
I
hours.
think we used a lot of Houdini in our pipeline, and that's it's a great piece of software that you can get really cool procedural destruction and shifting geometry and so we were trying to figure out ways that we could show the building shifting, like new and interesting ways to show it in different areas. And I actually can't remember who came up with that version of it. It was one of our VFX artists, and there was a reason it became this sort of hotel. I think there was an early piece of concept when we were trying to figure out what can we do with this shifting maze that will make it feel like a really rich and again strange part of this environment. And so again, in the lore of the world, the oldest house is this place where all of these different realities and dimensions sort of bleed in and blend together, and no one, not even the people that work there, fully understand how it works. And so there was this hotel, and there are things that strange things that happen there, and it got connected to the oldest house. And we did the effects team did a really great job of doing all the shifting there.
Because you also have the motel, right? This transition between spaces with the pulling the light switch 3 times and that hotel, that's a bridge between everything else. I can just see like you expand it out. That's your hub world between Control 2 or whatever.
Everything, yeah.
One of the things that strikes me with a game like Control and with the storyline, not the storyline, the environment, is that basically the oldest house, now you can have infinite spaces. So, I mean, I'm joking about Control 2, but you are doing expansion packs, and you could just go anywhere now, right? Because it's such a huge building that goes beyond the bounds
Absolutely.
of physicality, right? Another part of the environment of the oldest house, aside from the ashtray maze, is the motel, which changes every time you go into it. How much... I want to kind of know where that fits in, because it feels like I want to know what's outside
there's
that
something
motel.
There's something certainly to that location, something special.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of Americana in there. Like, for example, the hotline, right? The phone, the room with a hotline, which has to be that kind of like glass cage that Magneto would be like stuck in, so there had to be a hotel. There has to be, and this is what I was going back to a lot of expectations that are happily fulfilled within the game. That a lot of the inspiration seems to be things that feel very natural for that environment, which is just the most amazing, complete way to put it in. I think.
So I think one of the kind of guiding, again, pillars of the game was that it needed to feel grounded. It needed to feel grounded enough to be real, that you could walk into the room and believe that you were actually there and that it was happening. So there's kind of all these blurred lines between sci-fi and what is sci-fi, and fantasy and what is fantasy, because they span such massive genres. I mean, Star Trek is sci-fi, and Star Wars is sci-fi, and The Matrix is also sci-fi, and they're kind of all quite different. And so there was this question early on of like, well, what are we? Are we fantasy? Are we dark fantasy, or are we sci-fi? And the answer is sort of kind of neither. In a way, yeah, we kind of ended up being basically more supernatural than anything else. And so when we did Supernatural, it needed to not be, like glowing, orbs and things like that, but more like if you walked into the room, you could see this and you would go, holy crap, this is actually happening, and what is this type of thing.
But it's also the mundanity of a lot of them, like the fridge, the flamingo.
I guess that's another thing, the objects of power. It's like the rationale behind what they were. Like, what was that like, the process going through, choosing the ones that went into the game? Because I'm sure there's a bunch that were probably on a massive list somewhere, and you had to actually pick a handful that went in. Like, I highly doubt you got to put every object of power into this game.
We almost worked backwards in a sense. We knew which abilities we wanted to give you, and we knew that we needed something. Early on, it was just like a glowing light that you sort of picked up, with an interact on it. But eventually we knew that they needed to be these different objects, and so Sam and Mixu sat down, and I think every single one has a deeper meaning if you know what to look for or what it's actually referencing. And we did have a list, but they weren't random. There's actually a meaning to each one,
which you can find, I think, in a lot of the files. I think I've found some of it. And so this kind of leads me on to what is this, a Remedy universe? Because I mean, this has been announced that there's going to be new stuff, right? New game features, the expeditions which you mentioned earlier. Which, can you say anything about that, or just what was on there?
I'm not sure if I can say anything about that yet.
But yeah, the future of Control, like with the roadmap and what you've announced and what we've read in these files, it's kind of like looking at that kind of stuff, because like we're in the spoiler territory now. Like there are specific references to Alan Wake, for instance, and like he's called out by name in a couple of the documents. Kind of like the setting is called out as well. So it kind of does hint towards that. But once again, we've mentioned this as well about Control. Like the oldest house is almost the center of all these connecting worlds, these dimensions, these universes. So I guess it's not too far of a leap to go that far as well. And then you now have announced in your forward plan, like the last episode, at least what you have projected is AWE. And the image to that is like, if you look at it, you can kind of see and you can break out what it is. And some obviously people have already done it on the internet. It's kind of like gone up there. So combining that with what you can find in Control, if you explore and read it, like obviously I imagine everyone now is asking these kind of questions. It's like, is this the start of a Remedy universe? So is this something they'd already built years and years ago?
So this is something we've been working on and have been planning out for a while now. And yes, Control is part of the Remedy universe. And it is going to be connected to other things in certain ways. And the ways in which I have to be careful what I say here.
Yes.
But the ways in which it is connected are being worked on as we speak.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely insightful. If people wanted to get hold of you, via Twitter, I presume?
Yeah. Twitter is Bacon Sandwich. And anybody can shoot me a question or anything about level design or level design process or anything about the game. I will try to answer everything I can.
Thank you so much. And Jonathan, where can we find you?
As always, you can get me at Omni/92, and kind of likewise, I'm always up for chatting level design or anything like that in just methodology. So.
And I'm at Mark Drew. You can tweet at the show at Level Design FM. And again, thank you very much, and have fun in the oldest house.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. This has been a Command Studio production. Our editor is Matthew Lever, and our producer is Bridie Rose.